important thinkers and writers of our time. I first heard Anne speak, I guess it was 2 years ago at the American Holistic Medical Association meeting here, and she had just returned from Australia, and she gave one of the most inspiring talks I've ever heard. And she had just then recently published her book called, I love the title of this book, Beyond Therapy, Beyond Science. And I rushed out to the book booth and bought this book and rushed home and sat down and read it in pretty much one sitting. And I have been enormously influenced by Anne's thinking. Some of you may know her earlier works. She wrote a book called The Addictive Organization, which I think succeeded an earlier book called When Society Becomes an Addict, which was very important in my own development. Anne describes herself as a recovering psychotherapist. And she has this thing, somebody made a thing of famous Ann Wilson Schaef quotes, which I have in my office. And it's titled, For Women Who Do Too Much. And one of my favorites on that list, which I've actually used in my own work, is those times when you feel like you have to make a really, really big decision, and you don't know what to do, and you're trying to make a decision, and you're really, you have the list, the pros and the cons, and you're talking to everybody. And one of Anne's quotations is that big decisions cannot be made, they must be discovered. And it's been one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten, and I've used it again and again in my own scientific work when I'm trying to make a really big decision. Anne's most recent book, which I believe is it out? It's out there, I'm running, is called Native Wisdom for White Minds. Native Wisdom for White Minds. And without further ado, I have the great honor of introducing to you Ann Wilson Schaef.
Okay. I think I'm supposed to turn this off. I wonder first if we could just take a minute and settle in. My elders have said to me that we should never be at a gathering unless we pulley together, that we somehow in our own way stop and get in touch with our wholeness. So I would just ask that as we do our exploration today, that we explore with open hearts and with soft minds. I think our minds have become hard, and we need to soften them in order to be able to see what the Creator has for us to learn about the issues that we're exploring today. I'm falling apart. I have a sore throat and a cough, and last week I had laryngitis and thought I might not be here at all. If I have a coughing fit during this presentation, I have something mixed up here that's supposed to take care of it by naturopathic physician. Don't panic, just talk to each other while I have a coughing fit, and then we'll go on from there, okay? I come here knowing nothing about the topic, and the older I get, the less I know. I've been an authority on many things in my life, and I'm learning that I know less all the time. I also am experiencing myself in a time of major shift. I know where I've been, I think, and I have no clue about where I'm going. So I basically came today to share my ignorance with you and to share some observations to see if we can stretch our minds a little bit about possibilities. I want to share with you some of the ideas I've had. I want to share with you some of the work I've been doing that I think is very healing work that has come out of some of these ideas. And I want to share with you some of the things I've noticed in the last few years that I think are really important in terms of the way we look at age, in terms of the way we look at the term medical, in terms of the way we look at ourselves and our place in the universe. I have a couple of things to say about my books. Beyond Therapy, Beyond Science is out of print. The publisher said it was too controversial. And we're trying to buy up remainders. Look for it now in Target and places like that. You can get it really cheap. My belief is that the creator wanted to get in the hands of people who might not otherwise buy it at $22, so they're getting it for $2.98. We're of course going to bring it back in print at some point. Before it came out, I said to my friends, this book will not be understood until 50 years after my death. And I think that's probably true. I don't think it's 50 years out. And I plan to live another 30, 40 years. So in about 70 years, if you can get your hands on a copy, it'll probably be really right on target. Native Wisdom for White Minds, I absolutely love this book. I read it every day. It's a daily meditation book for bringing the wisdom that I've been privileged to share with Native elders all over the world. And I feel honored to have been given the possibility of bringing it to you. It's not my latest book. My latest book will be out next week. And it's a sequel to Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much, called Meditations for People Who May Worry Too Much, which seems to be a national pastime. In terms of my own work, I believe When Society Becomes an Addict is a basic book. I divide my books into kind of I don't like self-help, but personal healing books, like the meditation books or Escape from Intimacy, I think is a personal book. Women's Reality, When Society Becomes an Addict, The Addictive Organization, and Beyond Therapy, Beyond Science, and then my new book that'll be out next year, Living in Process. I think of broad books looking at what's going on, more theoretical really. It's been very hard for me to get out of the self-help section on some of these. That's one of the problems with Beyond, I think, is that New York Times refused to review it because it was a self-help book. And I think of it as a very broad theoretical book. I don't fit in. I don't fit into this culture. I wonder if anybody really fits in. But I think some people do it better than I do. few years ago I discovered my father was a Native American, and that's helped me a lot in terms of understanding why I don't fit in. And it's taught me a lot about DNA and something that we don't understand. Since I didn't know I was an Indian, but I thought like an Indian all my life. I'd like to start looking at some of these ideas about society as an addict. It is my firm belief that Western culture functions exactly like an active addict. That if we look at the characteristics of the individual alcoholic or any other addict, that Western culture has those exact same characteristics, but on a systemic level. One of the reasons that I call myself a recovering psychotherapist is that my own personal recovery from codependence and Al-Anon issues, I reached a point where I realized that my profession, my training in my profession, was the biggest obstacle to my own personal recovery. And that I, as a psychotherapist, had been trained in systemic codependence. And that in order to proceed with my own personal recovery, I had to give up my profession if I was willing to go to any length in my own recovery. Because my own profession was exacerbating my disease process. And what I see as people work on their own recovery, I see it kind of almost like this, that they reach certain levels. The first obstacle really is admitting that you're an addict. Once you kind of get a leg up on that and deal with the trauma of that, then there's a certain level of relief and you do your personal recovery. Then you come up to a block. And the block is interpersonal. And you come to a point where you say, I'm willing to recover as an individual addict, but am I willing no longer to participate in addictive relationships? And that's when most people leave recovery. Because the belief is, if I no longer participate in addictive relationships, I will always be alone. And that's more frightening than giving up a substance. And this is where I find most people leave what we call the Living Process Network, our international network, is when their relationship addiction surfaces to a point that they have to deal with it. And they say, this is too much, I leave. If you get through that obstacle, then the next one is my work. And if you think the first two obstacles were difficult, let me tell you, this is one where you see an exodus that would have made the exodus out of Egypt look like nothing. Because people are so addicted to money and their identity through their work that the thought that if they actually are going to live happy, joyous, and free, they can't do anymore what they've been doing. It's too much. Now, in terms of being an addict, and this is one of the things that the points that I want to draw on near the end, one of the major characteristics of an addict is an addict functions under the illusion of control. Addicts are always externally referented. An addict never ever causes or is responsible for anything that happens to them. Someone else is always responsible. And I think this is an interesting thing to look at, because someone else can be a virus, a germ, a person, a parent, a society, whatever, but it's always out there. In that process of always making it out there, we become, by definition, a victim. You're going to hear me swallow. I won't cough again. Now, I believe that modern psychology, which is what I have my doctorate in, I'm ashamed to say, modern psychology has set up a victim-perpetrator society. Because in modern psychology, what is real, and this is not only true of psychology, but any Western mechanistic science modality, okay? What is real is what's out there. What is real is what you can measure, validate, manipulate, and control. We can't really measure things like spirituality, although we've tried, feelings, although we can get a GSR or something, the influence of my unknown father. We can't measure those things. If we can't measure them, then we can't predict them, then we can't control them. So what modern psychology has done in using mechanistic science as its base is modern psychology has set up an entire culture that says, I am the result of the forces that have acted upon me. Feminism got caught in this one too. Not just modern psychology. If I am a result of the forces that act upon me, I'm a victim. Anybody who believes they are a victim will become a perpetrator. Every perpetrator has been a victim. Anybody who believes they're a victim becomes a perpetrator. They move into the illusion that the only way to regain their personal power is to perpetrate on the perpetrator. This is what feminism has done a lot. And in the process, become weaker, more angry, and more violent, which we can see on a systemic level as well as an individual level. Now, one of the responses to this victim-perpetrator dualism is to become progressively controlling. Because as we give up our personal power and responsibility, we become more frightened. And as we become more frightened, we become more controlling. One of my concerns about all these studies, as I sit here listening this morning, is that they're all based on the illusion of control. That I don't have any answer, I just have a lot of questions here. But that the goal is to be able to control. Now, control, I believe that any system that is based on the illusion of control is by definition an addictive system. Our government is by definition, an addictive system. Medicine is by definition an addictive system, because the focus of medicine is trying to control. There's a problem here. You cannot cure a disease by practicing the disease. I say this all the time in AA. You can't cure a diseased mind with a diseased mind. Part of the recovery that I see in the people that I see who are really, really into recovery from addictions is they have to recover from their stinking thinking. They have to recover from their addictive mind. My husband has a very good sponsor who says to him, I love this, I told him this the other day, who says to him on a regular basis, "You're an alcoholic. You're going to think this way. When you think this way, remember you're an alcoholic and that this is alcoholic thinking, and stop." Well, we have an entire culture that thinks this way, but they don't have my husband's sponsor. I wish they did. So nobody stops this thinking process. Now, some interesting observations here. When schizophrenia, the concept of schizophrenia, you probably don't know that. I didn't know it. The concept, but I worked at Bellevue Hospital, did my internship there, and we diagnosed schizophrenia up at the zoo. It was the schizophrenia capital of the world. We had schizophrenia diagnoses that were unbelievable. We had ambulatory schizophrenics. We had schizophrenics in remission. We had paranoid schizophrenics. We had general schizophrenics. And my favorite diagnosis was pseudo-normal schizophrenic. Unbelievable. Everybody was a schizophrenic. When schizophrenia was first coined, the concept, back, I think, 1930s, 40s. It included, did you know this? Included alcoholism. Under the rubric of schizophrenia was alcoholism. A few years ago, a friend of mine asked me to come down to Memphis and to consult with some clinics. They had mental health clinics down there because he'd listened to me, and he said, you know, almost all of our patients are lower class, a lot of them black, and he said they're all diagnosed with schizophrenia. But he said, after I listened to you for a while, I noticed there was no mention of drugs or alcohol, that it wasn't even in the intake notes. So I want you to come down and kind of look at these families and talk to these people. I thought that was interesting. No one asked if there was a history of drug and alcohol abuse in the person or in their family. Yet my observation is that what we call, schizophrenia is a thinking disorder. What we call schizophrenia is exactly the same kind of thinking we see in the active addict. The same thinking process. The schizophrenic is further down the line. One of my concerns about what I see happening in any kind of research is that we don't ask questions about influences that are integrated into the society. Do you see that? Do you see what I'm saying? We don't ask those questions because we don't want to know. Now, with addiction, this whole thing about control, I think is very, very important. The illusion of control. The belief that it is possible to control yourself, to control others, and that control is good. What I've learned from working with addictions all these years, that control will always destroy you. The illusion of control will always destroy you. So even if you aren't actively diagnosed or self-diagnosed, which is usually the case, as an addict, what does this mean? What does this mean if you are operating in a way that you believe that control is good? I think what it means is that you're operating in a diseased way. And that the whole process of addiction has become so integrated in Western culture that we don't see it because we think it's normal. And we want it to be someone else, someone not like us. But the addictive process itself is a progressive disease process. Not only on an individual level, but I think what we're now seeing, and I've really heard this from Native elders the world over, is that Western culture itself is an ongoing, progressive disease process that unless it stops, it will destroy the planet. I decided to talk to you about something light today. So that for me, the model, the concept of addiction. Now there are other things, dishonesty. I remember Jesus said, the path is steep and narrow, and the further up you get, the steeper and narrower it gets. And I'm discovering that. I'm discovering that the more sober I get, my tolerance for dishonesty, it's always been pretty low anyway, but it's pretty non-existent. That I don't want to be around people or spend any time with them who are not trying to be honest. That dishonesty itself is a disease. That dishonesty itself always erodes and destroys. I just had a letter from a woman who is a minister who's in the training with me, working with me. And she just started looking at her little dishonesty. And I wish I had it with me, so actually it's upstairs. But I was really touched by it because she said that I just started with a few little things that I decided to take a week, or was it a day? And just, I know, she gave up dishonesty for Lent, that's what she did. And the first few days she was just traumatized with the number of little dishonesties that she was tempted to do. But then what happened to her was almost transformative, because what happened to her was that she began to experience the positive of not being dishonest. And she quoted a Bible passage, I can't remember what it was. But she said the freedom that she started experiencing in herself was so exciting that she just felt like she was soaring. And her letter was just so enthusiastic. The energy that we spend in dishonesty and in dealing with other people's dishonesty. I happen to have a child who's 35, who is just, I divorced her father, but here I am, stuck with this kid. And I resigned last week from being a mother because the level of dishonesty I find toxic. I find physically toxic to me. Now, we're affected by dishonesty. We're affected by our own dishonesty, and we're affected by other people's dishonesty. Dishonesty is a norm in addiction. You lie and you don't even know you're lying. And you don't just lie about your drug use and your alcohol use. You lie about everything. You lie even when there's no need to lie. That takes its toll. That takes its toll. These are, you know, how many people are asked in your age research how often you lie and what they lie about? What does that do to the body? What does that do to the psyche? What does that do to the soul? I believe it destroys it. That's addiction. That's addiction. The illusion of control. Lying. Projection's another one. Every addict projects. Projects all the shit onto everybody and then reacts as if it's real. Making up stories. My husband's taught me a lot about this one. He's so wonderful in the way he does this recovery, and making up stories is one of his favorite things. I have a bellyache. What does he do? She's mad at me. Oh my God. You know, within 5 minutes we're divorced. He comes crawling in and saying, what did I do? I made up a story. His sponsor now says, check it out with him. He'll give you the truth. Don't worry about that. Stories that we make up. As a psychotherapist, it was called interpretation. I was trained to do it. It's called interpretation. If I can give you a story that fits with psychological theory, you don't have to do your work. You're off the hook. People love me. I was a fantastic interpreter. The hardest thing for me to give up because I was paid royally to make up stories about people and what was really going on with them, and I had a full grounding in Freud and Friedrich Reichmann and Fritz Perls and God knows who else, so I could make up a story about almost anybody. We called it an interpretation, and they left happy. It may or not have anything to do with what was really going on with that person, but it got them out of the responsibility of doing their own work and seeing what was going on with them. And we've incorporated this into the society. We've incorporated it at a level that's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Self-centeredness. Most of us would say we weren't self-centered. Self-centeredness. Something's going on with someone else, and you say, what have I done? That's self-centeredness. Assuming that the world focuses around you. One of my concerns with what I heard this morning was the self-centeredness of age. The self-centeredness of the way of conceptualizing about age. That it's you as an individual. That something is being done to you, happening to you, taking you out of context in a way. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that way of looking at the universe. One of the reasons I think we're diseased in Western culture is that we have progressively isolated ourselves. You know, many cultures don't even have a word for I. We do. We have raised individualism, i.e. isolation, to a point of reverence. Part, I think, of, when I'm older than I look, and in the 60s I was really into the existential philosophers. I loved existential angst. Well, my God, if you're totally isolated from the ground of your being and all of your connections with the universe and with each other, no wonder you're anxious. You know? We have called it scientifically with control studies objectivity. But objectivity is the process of removing yourself from yourself and making the self object to be observed and manipulated, and removing yourself from the other, whether the other is another person or whether the other is nature, the planet, the universe, and making them objects to be observed and manipulated. and destroyed. If I don't know you and I are the same, I can kill you. But if I know that you and I are the same, that we are all part of some ancient stardust that initially created us all, I have a little hesitation before I kill you anyway. But if I am isolated from here, I don't. When I dig a hole in the earth, if I don't know that I'm digging a hole in myself, something I heard a couple of years ago is, we can't save the rainforest till we know we are the rainforest. As long as it's out there, we can destroy it. And that we become self-centered when we lose contact with the fact that we aren't separated. One woman in the trade years ago said, when I'm into my self-centeredness, I'm out of touch with myself. Most of us are out of touch with ourselves all the time in Western culture. How much of age is that? I don't know. Interesting question. So addiction. If you don't like the term addiction, okay. Virginia Satir said to me before she died, major codependent. And dear, let's don't use the term addiction. People don't like it. Publishers told me a few years ago, before Beyond came out, addiction has passed its phase in publishing. We would prefer if you don't mention it again. It's out of vogue now. I think it's very much in vogue now. We just don't want to talk about it. I think it's epidemic. I don't think there's anybody in this society who isn't some form of an addict. And recovery works. You could do it. So, that's the big thing I talk about. Tell me not to talk about something, or that's the way to... I'm an Aries. I'm telling you, you say don't talk about it, I'll start blabbing. So that's one thing. We can't ignore it. We can't ignore the implications of addiction. We can't ignore what we've learned from addiction. When I first started going to 12-step meetings, first of all, I didn't go. I recommend it for all my clients. Typical therapist. Oh, I'm very supportive of addiction. I recommend it to all my clients. Yes, but do you go? Well, of course not. I don't have any problems like that. Then I discovered my clients started getting better when they went to 12-step meetings, and I became curious. What are they doing that I can replicate so that I can do it to my clients? So I started going to 12-step meetings with a yellow tablet. I often say I almost died of smoke inhalation. Not being a smoker myself. I always try to get near an open door or window, and then I caught pneumonia. I mean, it's just, they were not healthy for me, those 12-step meetings. I couldn't figure out why they worked. I asked a friend of mine who's a world-renowned psychic. He always knows everything because he has a direct pipeline with who. And I said, why does this work? And he said, oh, that's easy. I just hate it when he says, oh, that's easy. He said, that's because most of the beings there aren't on this plane. He said, only about a third of the beings there are in physical form. The rest of them are others who either didn't recover and have come back to help, or were in recovery and have come back to help. And I thought, well, now see, how can you test that? It sounded as good to me as anything else I'd been able to observe. But what was good for me with the 12-step program, I get teary when I say this, is I returned to what I knew there. And what I returned to was participation. I could not sit there. You know, my sponsor says to me, my sponsor says, you know, going to meetings and trying to get sober is like sitting in the garage and trying to become a car. And I did it dutifully. I went to meetings and I sat there. And I realized after a while that I could not objectively understand what worked. This is another problem with research. I could not objectively, and I was a really good researcher when I was in graduate school. I loved it. I was the star. In order for me to understand that program, I had to work it. I had to get a sponsor. I had to work the steps. I had to read the big books. I had to go to meetings. I had to participate. Not objectify. Participate. What happened to me in that process was I realized that I had become non-participatory in my life, in my planet. That I had moved into a paradigm that was destroying me. And the secret was participation. To me, that's the greatest thing that happened to me, that I did in these 12 steps, is that it forced me back into a participatory science. Then I read Morris Berman's book. Remember the title, Julie? Reenchantment of Science, or the Reenchantment of the World. The World. And Maury did, I think, just a fantastic job in that book of talking about non-participation and how the objectivity, the illusion of objectivity of Western science had pushed us into a non-participatory mode. And the skies opened for me. The skies opened for me at that point, and gave me a whole new perspective on science, on my understanding of science, my understanding of life, my understanding of how to function. And I moved back to participation. And what I've since seen is that Western culture is a non-participatory scientific worldview, and native cultures are fully participatory scientific worldviews. And they're very different. Very, very different. This is the clue. So addiction was the vehicle for me. Recovery was the vehicle for me to move back into participation. We have forgotten in Western culture what full participation in ourselves and the universe is, I think, in general. And I think we try to do it through crystals and, all this New Age stuff. What we want to do, a lot of us, I found this with the Holistic Medical Association, what we want to do is we want to look good, we want to change a paradigm in our head and keep doing everything the way we've been doing it, and stay safe doing it. And it will not work. It just will not work. People, they used to tell me at the AMHA that I was too far out. I'm not the one who's far out. That's the problem. Okay, so, second phase. I've been doing this work now for about 20 years, which I call living in process. There are kind of three phases to the living in process work. We have a process house here in Seattle, by the way, where this work is done. There are three phases. One is you have to deal with your addictive process. You have to do something with your recovery process. I think of a curve that goes like this, if you know. I love curves and graphs. I learned that in graduate school. When you first start in recovery, almost all of this is like time, and this is what you're doing. When you first start in recovery, almost all of your time is in the addictive process. But over time, that curve goes out. It becomes asymptotic with the axis. Love that term, don't you? It never crosses the axis because the addictive process is always there and always supported by the culture. But you're not living in it most of the time after maybe 5 years. It may be 5 years of recovery before you even have a glimpse of sobriety. It takes time. That's one of the miracles, that so many people are willing to do recovery when they don't know what it is. And that's why you have to get to a point where you have no other choice to really do it, I think. On that same curve is your living process. Many of us have tried to kill our living process. I don't know anybody. Drugs, work, sex, detachment, non-participation, all these things. But everybody I've ever met still has a living process. I think that's miraculous. But we have it pretty small sometimes. But in 2 to 5 years, those two curves cross, usually. So that in order for your living process even to be able, I don't know what, there's probably an analogy here with T cells or something. For them to begin to regenerate and come up, you have to deal with your addictive process. So that's part of it. The second part is that I believe and to me this is the wonder of the Creator, that as we have developed a society that is progressively destroying us, we have also concurrently been developing ways to heal from the society we have created. And one of those ways, I think, is our deep process work. That all of us, I just say that generally, have within us processes that have not been healed or completed. I think this is what Freud called, I love it, the boiling cauldron of the unconscious. Doesn't that just make you think of Macbeth? I love it. And we store those. We store those unfinished processes. Because I think most of us have not been process parented, and our society in general hasn't helped us to deal with what's happened to us as we try to cope with life from pre-birth on. So one of the magical things I think about being a human being is all of those processes are still there. They don't go away. Now this is not an attack, as some of us like to think. This is a gift. This is a gift. And they rumble around in us until we have reached a level of maturity, of clarity, of strength, of awareness, that we can deal with them. And they're always waiting to pop up. So that when we go into a depression, or an anxiety attack, or start having fits of anger, or fits of weeping, this is an indication of progress. This is not a failure, as we are taught to believe by Western science. This is an indicator of progress. We have reached a point where our inner being is telling us we're ready to deal with whatever that was. Let's say that you were sexually molested when you were 6 months old. It's highly unlikely that you're going to have what it takes at 6 months old to deal with that. But that's not going to go away. It's going to stay there inside of you, rumbling around till you're ready. So the fact that it's coming up is an indicator of strength, not weakness. Most of us, when we get depressed or we start getting anxious or having anxiety attacks or we start losing it, think we're losing it. Not so. That's our inner being saying, look how well you've done. Now you're ready to deal with this. Come on. And what do? We take a Prozac. Now we find someone who will help us control it. Control it. Instead of someone who will say, this is great. Let's go for it. I have had so many clients when I was a psychotherapist come in and say to me, my therapist just got really upset when I would start to cry or when I would start to sob. And they did everything they could to stop it. Right. Therapist problem, not client problem. If it's coming up, we're ready to deal with it. We need safe places to deal with our deep process work. We never know where our deep process is going to take us. I think of our deep process as a way of bypassing the illusion of control of our left brain. Now, I use right-left brain advisedly. I know it's not real. It's a construct. But let's look at this. What the research and the theory tells us is our right brain is the feminine, the emotional, the feeling part of our brain, and that our left brain is the logical, rational, linear. Okay? Bullshit. It's bullshit. The left brain, the logical, rational, linear, is full of feeling. But it is undifferentiated, primitive, non-developed feeling. So when the left part of our brain starts to think it's going to lose its illusion of control, what does it do? It panics. Primitive panic. And it says, I don't care what we have to do, let's get this back into control. And we find someone who will help us. Write out a prescription, give you a pill, talk about something else, get a little comfort, whatever it takes to shut off that process. Our processes are trying to bypass our brain and get to where healing takes place, which is in our being. Do you know anybody who ever healed from understanding? I used to have clients come to me who they had more interpretations and analysis and understanding of their family dynamics, their personal dynamics, psychology, whether it was TA or whatever, they had it. And crazy as a loon. Crazy as a loon. Didn't help a bit. I think of trying to heal through understanding is like trying to have a baby by masturbation. It can be fun, it can keep you occupied, you can even spend a lot of money at it, but you don't get a baby. What you get is what you got. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Understand never works. Healing takes place somewhere else in our being. So to heal, we have to get past that barrier of the illusion of control. And our being is trying to help us do that. There are two things that happen, I think, in deep process work, which I think both are significant. One is that we work through issues. Almost always, the door into the deep process has nothing to do with what the deep process is really about. It's one of the ways our inner being tricks us. I like that. I like it. The other thing that our deep process does on a more important level is it teaches us about process. It teaches us to start living in process and ignoring our illusion of control. Because time after time after time, when we get the relief of doing our deep process work, we come up with this little gem of something that we could never have figured out in a million years. And we learn that we can start to process, or we can start to trust the process of our inner being. That it will take us where we need to go. And that we don't have to try to control it because we simply don't have the knowledge and information to do it. So in a way, it teaches us about our powerlessness. That our thinking brain does not have all the information. Our DNA, our experience, our unconscious, our unknown, our ancestors, God knows what, has more information than we do. It gets us out of the self-centered I-ness of Western culture. And helps us, sometimes, for example, there are people that I'm working with now, as far as I can tell, their deep processes have nothing to do with their own personal life. That they are in the process, as far as I can tell. Well, I had a letter from a woman recently who said, I do not want to be involved in healing the planet. It's too hard. Because her deep processes, she's done her personal deep process work. She's still going to the mats. She's still doing this intensive work. And it doesn't seem to be really related to her. It seems like something else. Now, let's look at false memory syndrome. It's big here in Washington, state of Washington. I love the concept of false memory syndrome. It is my hope that it will be the concept that completely destroys psychology. Because it is being approached from the perspective of control. It is being approached from a dualistic perspective. It is either true or it's not true. If it's true, then you punish, you go the legal route. And if it's not true, then you're crazy. That's a wonderful hill for psychology to die on, frankly. Who cares? Who cares whether it's true or not? That is one of the best distractions you can get for not doing your work. If something's coming up, if you're having a memory of being incested by your father at age 6 months, okay. It's none of your business about your father. It's none of the court's business. It's none of the therapist's business. It's nobody's business. He has his own stuff to deal with. If this is coming up, what is happening is your inner being is saying, okay, let's bring this up. This will help her, him, heal. When we try to make it real, we're in trouble. Same thing with cult memories, whatever. Doesn't matter. Your inner being is bringing it up because it will facilitate something you need to do to heal. Whether it's true or not is totally irrelevant. Several years ago, when I first started doing this work, I had a lot of people having deep processes about being death camp survivors. Well, I got really busy. It's this reincarnation stuff. I love the way we discredit. Have you listened to some of the stuff about false memory syndrome and other things? It's like, how are UFOs discredited? They're discredited by, for example, theories of self-hypnosis. Self-hypnosis is only legitimate in the scientific world when it's trying to discredit something that is less legitimate. It's amazing how all these things that are used to discredit something are not credible until they can be used to explain something that's less credible. I even heard you say several times, weird. Shame on you. Nothing is weird, we just don't understand it. That's our self-centeredness. Put it out there, huh? Instead of saying, I don't understand this, we say it's weird. That's what I was talking about putting it out there and not taking responsibility. So, false memory syndrome, who cares? Who cares? This stuff is coming up for you. Do your work. It will lead you into some beautiful garden of healing that you may not have been able to get to otherwise. Nobody has to prove it's real or unreal. That's a waste of time, that's a distraction. Same thing with my death camp people. Well, I'll share with you one of the processes early processes when I was doing this work. This was in Milwaukee. I'll never forget this woman. And she watched me very carefully for a couple of days. It was a 4-day workshop. And then she came up to me the second night and she said, I'm in therapy, I'm happy with my therapist, my life is going well, I think she was a social worker. But she said, there's something I need to work on, and I don't know what it is, I don't know what it's about. And I've been waiting for the right person, and I've been watching you, and I think I might be able to do it with you. Are you willing for me to stretch out and do my deep process? I said, absolutely. She said, well, I don't want to do it at night. It's too frightening. Can we do it in the morning? I'd like to make an appointment with the group that we will work on this in the morning. Sure. That was when I didn't know better. And so the next morning we did, and she started out, and she said that she had this recurring dream all of her life, and she was absolutely terrified since she was a very young child. And the dream was thousands of gaunt, hollow-eyed faces passing before her, all of them looking at her accusingly. And she said she told very few people about the dream. She had no idea what it was about. It recurred pretty regularly on a periodic basis. And so I said, well, let's see where your process takes you. And she was one of those people back then where I would say, I hope my malpractice insurance is paid up. Because she went into a process, and I tell you, it scared the shit out of me. And my theory, when I'm facilitating a process like that, is to keep breathing and pray. I mean, that's kind of... And first she went into, I'm trying to remember the sequence, and I probably don't have it right, but what I remember is that she went into a terror so deep and so complete that I firmly believed her heart would stop. It didn't. Never has. Some people said to me, well, I think I'll die if I do this. And I said, well, I'll write you up. You'll be the first one. Hasn't happened. She then went into a kind of pleading. All this was without words. What seemed to me like just deep, 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 deep guilt and remorse of a level, again, I thought she could die with it. It was so intense. Then she went into fear again, but it wasn't the same as that terror. What I do remember, I don't remember all the phases, what I do remember was that she finally went into this peace, this serenity, that she almost floated. I mean, we all just sat there and cried with the wholeness that you could experience from this woman. And when she came out of it, she shared her process, which I think is important to bring it back out through your left brain, not to start with your left brain. We have the brain in the wrong sequence. That's a lot of our problem in Western culture. And what she said was, she said, I was an SS officer in a death camp, and I killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And she said, at first I thought these faces were coming at me, threatening me. And I was terrified. I was terrified. And then she said, I felt the guilt of what I had done. What I had done. And she said, this miracle happened. And I suddenly realized that they were there. I never can tell this without crying. That they were there not to punish me, but to tell me to live. To do my life. And she, honestly, she was radiant. Every once in a while I get a letter from her. She said, I don't suppose you remember me. A lot of people say that. I think I remember them all. And she changed her profession. She left social work and she became an environmental architect. Now, who knows whether she was an SS officer in a death camp? Do I need to prove that? Does she need to prove that? No. She did her work. Something happened. Her life achieved a level of serenity she'd never known. We all have that capacity, I think, as we do our work. We can't do this with our brains. We can't do it with thinking about it. For a long time, I tried to make a theory about all this. I think the one I liked the most was that in our deep process work, we tap into the hologram. Or what, maybe Casey called the Kasich record. Who knows? We pull out of it whatever we need to facilitate the healing that we need to do at that time. And we do it. How much of our healing and work and our way we conceptualize how to heal is based on a belief that we are part of a whole that is much larger than ourselves, that we are the same with. Our individual focus will not let us do that. Maybe AIDS is isolation. Maybe AIDS is because gays have so pulled out of the hologram that they're so isolated they're more vulnerable. I don't know. I think it's a good thing to look at. So this deep process work, I think, is absolutely essential for all of us. It's also fun. Most times. Sometimes it's not. Okay. The kind of third piece is what I call, it's kind of the umbrella of the other two. It's what I call learning to live in process. And to me, living in process is a paradigm shift. It's learning to live out of a different world view that's less diseased than Western culture. Now, I have glimpses of this. I just said to an advanced training group, I know a little more than you do what we're about. That's why you're working with me and paying me to share with you what I know. The reality is, I don't know much. And we're finding out together what this alternative system is. Leanda called me and said, how can you help me with this research and how can we do it in a different paradigm? I said, I don't know. I said, one of the ways I might be able to help you is to call you on the old paradigm. That I think I can do. But to give you a research design that's totally new paradigm, I said, I think that there's a good possibility that research doesn't exist in the new paradigm. So what are you going to do with that one? She pays me to say things like that. What do I know? I know that as I spend time with Native people, I live in a different paradigm. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Vine Delorier's latest book. I think it's a good mind stretcher. It's called Red Earth, White Lies. Highly recommend it. He challenges the concept of evolution. Nothing big. I'm beginning to think he's right from my own experience. But what would that do? I mean, it's taken me a year after reading the manuscript to get my mind around if I stop thinking evolutionarily. Just my mind. Yeah, I've hardly touched down here yet. How much the concept of evolution is in my bone marrow, being a Westerner. But being an Indian, it's not there. And then I always thought the Christians, who wanted the creation story taught in schools and not evolution, I didn't like that bunch, so I didn't want to identify with them. On the other hand, there's something missing in this evolution thing. Something missing. Doesn't fit with all the information Native people have, which seems to be make a lot more sense than some of the information we have in Western culture. So lots of things like that I've begun to look at. I've also found a way of living and being, which frequently, I haven't done any speaking for 3 years now, 1 or 2 occasions. Actually, I came because I wanted to spend time with you and Glenna, support the Seattle Process Network. Because I've been mute. I've been listening for 5 years now. And what I learned is when my mouth is going, I learn less. So I've been listening. Been listening to Native elders. When I thought about coming here to talk, there were 2 books that sprang to my mind immediately. They're both Samoan. One is called Samoan Medicine. We'll forgive them for the medicine thing. It's published in New Zealand. The other one I like the title better. It's Talking Health, Living Disease. Now, if you were Samoan, and I was Samoan, and you came to me and you were sick, first thing I would say to you is, what's going on in your village? What's going on in your extended family? Is your village having any problems with another village? Get your mind around that. In Western culture, we have isolated the individual as the center. This one question about the heavy metals. How much is AIDS our litmus paper for Western culture? How much is AIDS our warning signal that we are in such a mess environmentally that our immune systems are so blown out through addictions, through toxic waste, through environmental poisons, through all kinds of things, through medicine. I mean, it's quite likely, there's a lot of research that says that AIDS started through Western medicine. Seems pretty likely. Or what's this latest book, Glenna, that we were talking about, the last epidemic, or the coming plague? How much is Western medicine setting us up to take care of the overpopulation of the planet? I cringed every time you said medicine. I can remember when I was speaking in Moscow at an addictions conference, and one of the speakers, I'd been really hopeful about her because we were the only 2 women on the program, and she was a recovering person and a psychiatrist, and she kept talking about a medical disorder and a psychiatric disorder. And I thought, wait a minute, she's a recovering person, and she's talking this way. And she's talking about alcoholism as a psychiatric disorder or medical disorder. And it took me a long time. I started getting a headache listening to her talk because my personal excitement was that she was a recovering person and she was a woman, and therefore she would say smart things. And I was halfway through the talk with a headache and a stomachache before I started hearing this word, medical psychiatric, medical psychiatric, medical psychiatric. And what I was hearing was people were defined by medicine. And people were defined by psychiatric. And that's who they were. And that was what was going on with them. And that was limiting them by the ability of medicine and psychiatry to understand what was going on with them. And she was saying, people have a psychiatric problem. Well, I have a problem with psychiatry, but I didn't see that the people she was talking about had a psychiatric problem. But if they didn't have a psychiatric problem, they didn't fit into an insurance category, they didn't fit into a DSM category, then they didn't exist. When we start thinking in terms of medicine being the definer, we're in trouble. If we start thinking in terms of AIDS as medicine being the definer, I wrote something down, Leon, I'm not going after you personally, just going after you. A medical, she said these words, a medical solution to AIDS. Isn't that embarrassing? Isn't that embarrassing? I know, I just hate it when... That's why I don't like to sell tapes. I can understand why Andrew didn't want to do that, because then you hear you said these things and you went, mouthwash, it's just, because we're all contaminated with this way of thinking, which some people call alcoholic thinking. We've got to clean out, and maybe that's what we're doing. I don't know. In the hologram, if you really believe you're part of the whole, we're all going to come and go. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. We participate in the whole, and we participate on different levels and different consciousness and different times and different ways, sometimes in a material form, sometimes not, maybe. But we don't leave completely. If you think of the hologram, how would we look differently? See, the whole focus is on control this, stop this, medical solution, which can be worse than the disease, maybe. And many times it is. You see? So the Samoans say, what's going on? So we have AIDS. We have alcoholism. What if we said, what's going on in the culture? How come this is happening? Culturally, how come people are so isolated and in so much pain in the culture? I love reading these two books because it just, my brain, because, I was a pre-med. I was going to go to medical school, and then I had this thing that I couldn't do it. I went into trauma for about 9 months while I was trying to fill out those medical school applications. And the Creator gave me a Danforth scholarship for a year to think about it. And by the end of a year, I couldn't stand doctors. So I decided I didn't want to be one of those. So I went into psychology, thinking it was better. It wasn't. Mechanistic science, one of the things that we don't even think about, it's so accepted, that we don't even think that mechanistic science says you are a machine. And we will treat you as a machine, and you will get better. We will replace parts, like we do with your car. I mean, I love working on my car because compared to people, my car is really simple. My father was an engineer. I understand mechanics. You are not a machine. Trying to treat you as a machine, trying to treat AIDS as if you're a machine, linearly, is not going to work. I think there's a possibility that AIDS for the society may be what hitting bottom is for an alcoholic. That AIDS may be our warning signal. If you don't shift, this is what's coming. Now, this is only the beginning. That we can't take each individual out of context. This doesn't mean that we don't care for an individual. We do. But that the individual exists in isolation is absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. Our sickness is systemic. It's not just individual. Our sickness is systemic. When we forget that, we've lost the perspective that we need to work successfully with healing. What I'm seeing, in the work that I'm doing, we had a big kind of shift last summer. And we had an international gathering with elders with us from all over the world, Australian, Aboriginal, Native American, Maori. It was really quite something. And what I began to verbalize was, I quit doing individual work back in 1984, and I work only in groups. But what I started saying was, you're here, you come in here, you come to me, you come to the Living Process Network for your individual pain and recovery. But that's not what this work is about. This work is about community. And the healing can only take place in community. And when we try to heal individually, it'll never work. Well, there were a lot of people who said, shit, I wanted to come, I wanted to pay you, I wanted to do my work, and I wanted to leave. The old psychotherapy model, the old medical model, the whole thing. I don't want any community responsibility. I don't want to have to relate to other people. I don't want to have to really care about what happens to the other people here. I want to be self-centered. How much has our model for healing been supportive of the addictive self-centeredness of the society by focusing on the individual in isolation? Completely, I think. Healing cannot take place. But what's AIDS done? AIDS has demanded community. Demanded community. Some of the most interesting work being done is being done in community. Maybe the learning's going the wrong way. Maybe instead of the AIDS community needing to learn from medicine and a medical problem, maybe the learning needs to go the other way. What does the AIDS epidemic have to teach us about what's wrong in the society? I think that's a possibility. Well, to sum up, I haven't a clue what I'm talking about. We have one man who's a medical doctor in the Living Process community who is HIV positive, who's healthy as a trout right now. And he's doing all kinds of different things. I hope he'll participate in your study. He said he would. We have a lot of people who've been miraculously cured when they've done their deep process work and had that medically validated. They already knew it. We had one woman who came who had, she'd been so badly beaten by her ex-husband, that she had irreparable kidney damage and was waiting for kidney transplant. She came. She got into a rage again. It was one of those where I said, I hope my malpractice insurance is paid up. I thought she might die in the process. She didn't. She went back and her function had improved so significantly that they took her off the list for kidney replacement. I think she's since had it, but years later. We had one woman who had, see, I'm not really good, I've kind of started ignoring medical terms these days, but she had been diagnosed at Menninger, and she came on a stretcher, and she had, I'll just describe it, some kind of disease where the bones were progressively turning to kind of like jelly. Anybody know what that is? I don't really care, but she started doing her deep process work, started doing her recovery work. Basically, she was on her way out. 2 years later, I met her, big tall woman, she was 6 foot something. I met her at the hotel where I like to stay in Minneapolis, the Sofitel. She was dancing. She said she never learned to dance as a kid because she was too tall. But now she was learning how to dance, and she was almost symptom-free. At that point, she was also learning how to ski. She was in a brace when she came on a stretcher. We have a lot of things like that. People say we should document them so you could quote us. I don't care. I don't have to prove this works or doesn't work. I think if for the people who come and the people it works for, it works. I'm not sure that being validated by a system I don't believe in would help me much. I think we're in a time of major paradigm shift. It's not something we can do with our minds. We cannot make mental paradigm shifts. It's going to be like sitting in a garage trying to become a car. We have to make experiential paradigm shifts. I think that's what we do. I think that's the work that I'm doing is experiential paradigm shifting. I may change the name of it. I see it work for some people. My Indian name is Wamblishka Wakanwi, which is Sacred White Eagle Woman. I'm told that this has been really real for me lately. I'm told that the role of the eagle is to fly higher and to see the whole picture. I was recently told by a Maori friend that the reason he loves for me to come and visit with him when I'm in New Zealand is that he's working with his own tribe in his own village, and they're trying to become self-sustaining and go back to the old ways, and he feels that this is very important work. But when I come, we talk about what's going on all over the world, and he feels validated and supported. And he said, that's your role for me. I've just been told by my husband, I was reading this wonderful book, I don't know if you read it or not. It's called The Stone Diaries. There's a Booker shortlisted Pulitzer Prize novel. It doesn't have anything to do with anything I'm saying today. What I love about it is it's absolutely magnificently written. I would cut off an arm. I shouldn't say that, but to write like that, I would love to be that kind of writer. And I was saying to my husband that I don't think I'll ever be able to write this well because I don't know this much about anything. This woman obviously knows a lot about gardening and what kind of plants you plant where and the kind of fertilizer they take, and I mean that's a big part of the book. And what you don't plant next to which and why, and this needs an acid soil, all those wonderful details that I don't know. And I said, I don't think I could ever do this kind of novel writing, because something that makes a novel really interesting is knowing all these little things about something. And Chuck said, no, that's not what you have to contribute. You're an eagle. Your job is to see the overview. And then that very night, this Mahler mentioned the same thing to me. So I said, I get it. I'll keep flying. So I don't think I'm going to ever be doing AIDS research. I'll probably never come up with a medical cure. If I do, I wouldn't call it that. But I think we need to be looking at bigger pictures. We need to be looking at bigger things.